We're the charitable foundation, Bank of America, and a trustee. The Greater Hartford Arts Council's United Arts Campaign, the Hartford, the Mark Twain Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Humanities and Travelers. Now on to introductions. Our moderator is Grace Belanger. She's the Associate Director of Interpretation at the Mark Twain House Museum. And our author is Cecelia Tichi. She is an American academic and author. She's the Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Professor of English and American Studies at Vanderbilt University, the former president of the American Studies Association, and the winner of the J.E. Buell Medal for Lifetime Achievement in American Literature. She has authored 5 mystery novels and several fiction and nonfiction books based on American popular culture and social history. Please sit back and enjoy, and don't forget there will be a Q&A at the end of the program.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, in person and online. I have had the most amazing afternoon getting to spend time with Cecelia Tichi here. I found her books in 2021, came up on my Amazon feed because I love Gilded Age mysteries. And it said, if you like this one, you might like this one. And I said, sure, I'll buy it. And I started with The Gilded Death. And a couple weeks back, or 3 or 4 months ago, our literary programming person said, we're going to have her come speak. And I said, oh, really? He says, you know who she is? And I said, yeah, what's she speaking about? And they said, her mysteries. And I'm like, really? Can I talk to her? So I'm going to fangirl here. There are 4 of these books about Roddy and Val. They are set in the Gilded Age, and it starts with the Gilded Death and then moves on. But the new book is A Deadly Gilded Age Freefall, and it's just out, and I've had the opportunity to read it, and it's fantastic. So,
Well, thank you so much. I, too, have had a wonderful afternoon, and we've just been tooling about here in New England. And just to say, my characters, and I get asked, where do they come from, and why historical mysteries? I think there are 2 points about this issue. One, historical situation situates the present. We study the past to know more about our own present. If we Google Gilded Age, many of the items that arise on our screens refer to these years right now. Years of tremendous wealth inequality, of great exuberant inventiveness. Think of the digital world we're all in that just a few years ago would have been inconceivable. What is email? And something could replace the Remington typewriter. So vigorous inventiveness, and a few people unbelievably wealthy. I was told by my taxi driver this afternoon about Jeff Bezos's new yacht that had to require the dismantling of a bridge near the shipyard in Europe so that the yacht could reach its deep water ports. So this sort of thing. Well, we go back to the Gilded Age, and that is a name endowed by Mark Twain. So it's wonderful to be here, the Mark Twain House and Museum, the founding figure of the Gilded Age. We know that Mark Twain co-authored the novel, The Gilded Age, with Charles Dudley Warner. But we ought to remember that that same era was alternately called the Age of Steel and Steam the age of enterprise, and the age of energy. Those three names competed with the Gilded Age. What survived from Twain and Warner is the perfect antagonism between the sheen, the gold, the glitter, and underneath the base metal. And that novel, dare I say it, Mr. Twain, it's not your best, but it has some of the issues that roil around today. The lobbyists prowl the halls of Washington, and the connivers connive with land deals and booms and busts. There are women villainesses as well as some well-meaning people who are after the right thing to do. So I have, as a classroom teacher and library researcher for a long time at Vanderbilt University, and by the way, Vanderbilt as a major name in the Gilded Age, I feel on the faculty I was fated probably to work in the Gilded Age, but it's an era of Mark Twain and Willa Cather and Edith Wharton and wonderful art. And so if I'm asked, and I'll preempt your question because you will ask,
Oh, yeah.
where did those characters come from? They came from my historical research. Valentine Mackle is a silver heiress who grew up in mining camps in Colorado and then moved with her father, by now a silver king, to Virginia City, Nevada. And if you're a historical novelist, you better go to the places, if you can, where your novels take place. I invite everybody, do visit Virginia City. If Disneyland did it right, it would be Virginia City. and that's, of course, where Samuel Clemens got his start working on the Territorial Enterprise newspaper. John Mackey lived in Virginia City when he became a Silver King. He was, this is a real guy, John Mackey, an Irish immigrant, worked in the Brooklyn shipyards, went west, mined silver, and he thought that a certain vein was not worked out yet. He bought the rights, all the claims, he mined it, and he became a multi-gazillionaire. Now, the School of Mines, the University of Nevada, Reno, is named the Mackey School. I fictionalized that papa so that his daughter Valentine, born on February 14th, could be the silver heiress. Where did she come from apart from my brain? Evelyn Walsh McLean, in her memoir, tells of growing up in those Colorado Rockies, spending freezing sub-zero nights in a union suit under a bearskin rug, until Papa beckoned her close and said, "Daughter, I've struck it rich." So Valentine, meets up a fifth generation New Yorker, Knickerbocker, Roderick Wyndham DeVere, whose family is at the edge of a forced sale of all their material possessions, their racehorses and their mansions and all of it, because of his father's poor investments. They go west to Virginia City, and why? Papa hopes one fling at the silver mines will enrich the family's coffers, fill them up again. And they have a second reason. Their son, Roderick, has become interested in a new invention of the Gilded Age, cocktails. Cocktails. As a boy, he visited the Barnum Museum just down Lower Manhattan. And as an adolescent, he wearied of seeing the whale's tooth and the mummy and walked down the block where there was a bar where a famous bartender, Jerry Thomas, was fixing new drinks with whiskey and fruit juice and fruit garnishes. And he had a cocktail shaker, like a maraca. And Roderick became fascinated. And he bought the book by Jerry Thomas, subtitled Le Bon Vivant's Companion. And so, when his parents discovered the book in his suite, they were so alarmed that their son had become addicted to alcohol that they took him with them to Virginia City, hoping he would dry out and that Papa's investments in the mines would pay off. You see how a historical novel has to be grounded. The characters have to come from somewhere, and if they are a mismatch, as these two are, there has to be some attraction to draw them together. To draw them together. Okay.
I'm okay? Okay.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So, just to say, can you hear me, everyone? Out there in television land, are you there too? Okay. Here's how it comes about. The DeVeres book a room at the Silver Dollar Hotel and Saloon. It's an excellent restaurant because Virginia City was at one point one of the wealthiest cities in the United States. Val and her papa, Patrick Mackle, dined there regularly. And across the tables, Rufus DeVere begins to talk to Patrick Mackle about the mines. Meantime, Roderick and Val have caught one another's eye. And Roderick asks, would you like to see a trick? Val would. He goes to the bar and he asks the bartender for 2 silver mugs with insulated handles. In one of them, some Scotch whiskey, hot Scotch. In the other, hot water, a little sugar, some lemon juice. He raises one mug up, has the Scotch set alight, and he pours from one to the other, and it is a blaze of blue. The drink is the Blue Blazer. It is one drink in Jerry Thomas's Bon Vivant bar book. I have asked some bartenders, ever make a Blue Blazer? The answer I sometimes get is, once. Okay, you can see. But that's the flirtation. And then Papa Mackle passes away, and Val joins Roddy. She is now very rich. His family fortunes are restored. The two of them start to live the Gilded Age life. New York in the winter, Newport in the summer, and so it is. They become ensnared in a crime that seems to have been committed at Mrs. Astor's annual ball. A poisoner is stalking society, and they are called upon to help a friend.
yeah,
And so there, a gilded death.
A Gilded Death. It's fascinating when you're reading it. You talk a little bit just now about Val and Roddy and Mr. DeVere talking with Patrick about the silver mining, but the in the novels, when they get back to New York, of course, Val has saved the family from ruin, but the animosity between her and her mother-in-law and father-in-law is very apparent, and that's fascinating.
Oh, yes. Well, she's a Wild West, not just a newcomer, but an outlier. She has no place in this social order, and she knows it. She's invited everywhere, but not really welcome. The advantage of Val for the fiction is that she has what is sometimes called a fish out of water eye. Through her Wild West vision, she can analyze what's going on and stake out her own life within, but also somewhat without. Meanwhile, Roddy has become quite the mixologist. and he is consulted by resorts, railroads, steamship lines. His requirement is that his name not be on the cocktails that he invents. That credit goes to the master bartender, whatever the resort might be. Um, it's helpful in the novel that I can explain at this time who was and was not permitted to drink cocktails. Gentlemen only. Ladies could have champagne flowing like tap water, and after dinners, liqueur in thimble-sized little glasses. But the cocktails were reserved for the gentlemen. Now, in private homes, of course, secretly. And after all, a lady was under constant chaperonage and escorting by gentlemen, including coachmen, not the gentleman, but to be escorted to the coach. Coachman would assist her, or the groomed into the coach, and then into the house. So no tippling lady ever found her way into the Town Topics sauntering section that was the scandal sheet of the Gilded Age. And so, of course, it has to be in the novel, too. Yes.
Yeah.
And Val and her friend Cassandra find themselves hinted at in the novel and are just fit to be tied, as the saying go. Yes, yes.
Well, the series progresses from the Gilded Death into Murder in the Gilded Central Park, and the you touch on another topic of the Gilded Age that was very popular, spiritualism, with Val's friend Cassie. Can you tell us a little bit about?
Yes. You know, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I said it's a rule of thumb. I've said it to students, I've said it to other writers when we all get together. Never create a character whose outlook you can't in some way endorse, underscore, or share. Several times, perhaps in all of our lives, there have been coincidences that seem too coincidental. For a long time, Duke University ran a program in parapsychology, paranormal experiences. I think they've shut it down. They couldn't get the data that they hoped to get. And there was, starting from the Gilded Age, the Psychical Society attempting the same sort of research. I have heard about and experienced enough of these coincidences that Val's good friend, Cassandra Fox Forster, a woman who all her life has been deemed superstitious, attributed to a nanny, unfortunately from the islands, who introduced her to visions of worlds unseen. The parents became alarmed, dispatched the nanny back to the islands, but Cassie has intimations of events in the future, or some events from the past that will fill her mind. And this is a useful fictional technique for me, as Val sometimes hears from Cassie of a warning. Let me tell you this, which is an actual research finding of mine. I mentioned Evelyn Walsh McLean, who grew up in the Rocky Mountains mining camps. In Newport, Rhode Island, once her family became so very rich and was politically well connected, her father serving presidents, they were at Newport in an annual event called the Clam Bake Club, when ladies in long kidskin gloves and those broad-brimmed ostrich-plumed hats, and the gentlemen wearing what passed for sports clothing, but was, of course, by today's standards, quite formal. They all drove their carriages out to a certain place where the clam bake had been under the rocks, steaming for a good many hours, and they all enjoyed clams and lobsters and had some minor sporting events, sort of batting around shuttlecocks with tennis rackets, this sort of thing. Well, on one occasion, just for fun, there was a fortune teller, and people lined up one after another. And so did Evelyn, and so did her brother Vincent, at the time in his teens. And everyone had their fortunes told, but Vincent did not, and the fortune teller said, "I can't tell a fortune, he has no future." Well, it seemed so silly. Robust young man, heavily muscled, good sportsman, all of that. And on the way back from the Clam Bake Club, in the Mercedes, chauffeured by a French full-time chauffeur, Vincent asked to take the wheel. And so he did. Evelyn recalled feeling the car rock, and then a crash and a crunch. She was severely wounded, and the recovery was over years, including a radical surgical procedure. It was only when she was well on her way to recovery that she was told that her brother Vincent had not survived the accident. That was the very afternoon after the fortune teller. Now, if you are doing this sort of historical mystery, you have to decide, are you closer to Agatha Christie or Patricia Cornwell, perhaps? And you better stay where your contract with the reader situates you. So Val's good friend Cassie has premonitions, and there are near misses, but there is nothing so horrific as what Evelyn Walsh McLean recalled in her memoir about that accident. And the reason there is not is that in the opening chapters, you establish I just call it a contract with the reader. What will be permissible, what will be enjoyable, what will spark interest, and what is out of bounds. And so that's the reading audience that you cultivate and you want to have with you. And, if I may say, I risk being a monologue here. Can I just go on?
Fine, please.
Because here are 4 books, and as you know, I'm deeply into the 5th one. So if it's a series, what do you owe the reader? Something new, something fresh. The last thing you want anybody to say is, "Oh, that again. I saw that sentence before." That sentence from no. You want to renew interest, and at the same time, the question of your character's development is also important. Did they learn something from their last go round, or are they back to the first innocence that they had at the beginning? No. The process, and you know this from perhaps Donna Leon's Policeman Brunetti, the series, it's wonderful, set in Venice, or for Louise Penny with Gamache in her Three Pines village in Canada. Some people are rock solid, but it doesn't mean they don't change, and they need to have new insights, new ways of thinking, and you better have it happen for them, for the reader. Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed in the books is sometimes Roddy seems to be very, very much the old school Knickerbocker, and sometimes he takes on the newer more avant-garde sides of Val, and he seems to be walking a very tight rope.
Yes, yes, he does. He is a traditionalist. If he and Val are invited to go yachting, and something comes up, he's perturbed. They've accepted the invitation. There better be an emergency. Otherwise, the social contract that they all have with their friends and their longtime summer coterie in Newport, want to disrupt that. There's something else about Roddy that I haven't quite revealed this evening, and it's that in addition to mixing cocktails and inventing them, and the recipes are in the books. In addition to that, Roddy, as a law school graduate, is now defending saloons, cafes, hotel bars from the temperance crowd. The temperance movement is on the march, and in fact, from 1850, there were waves, and the reasons. It's not to be dismissed. The mill workers in Pittsburgh, or the packing house workers in Chicago, after leaving the packing house, Armour or Swift, or the others, and on the way home, the street is Whiskey Row. That is the actual name of the street. One saloon after another, offering not only beer and whiskey, but the free lunch. Pickled pig's feet and eggs and all sorts of salamis and bolognas and breads. For a nickel beer, you were able to help yourself. The problem was that on payday, too much of the wages went to Whiskey Row, so that by the time the workman was back in probably a tenement with a wife trying to keep a whole brood shorn. That's not the word, is it? Shorn? Sheep? What are we drinking here? Shod. Thank
Shod.
you. Yes, to keep shoes on their feet and keep them warm in those Chicago winters, and so here was hubby who had spent it all on booze. So there was very good reason why the temperance movement was strong and was growing, but the ultimate objective was to prohibit all whiskey, all alcoholic drinks, beer as well. Any libation with any alcoholic content was to be absolutely prohibited. In the novels, Roddy is sometimes asked, "Do you really think that the president would sign a law prohibiting whiskey? Oh, come on, Roddy, that'll never happen." And Roddy says, "I believe it will." So, of course, that's a cast future for 1920,
Yeah.
for what H.L. Mencken would call the 13 awful years.
The new book, A Deadly Gilded Freefall, actually delves into some other issues that the production of alcohol that's not quite appropriate, or I don't even know how to say this.
Try health.
Yeah, healthy. How did you stumble onto that idea?
Well, American Studies. My faculty appointments, starting at Boston University a long time ago, in the Department of English. Then came something called American Studies. Its detractors say, well, that's just sort of amateur work in history, anthropology, or what have you. But dipping into what historians had been disclosing about food contamination and the contamination, of medicines and of alcoholic drinks as well. And historians have written whole books about it. There's a book called The Toadstool Millionaires, and it's about 19th century pharmacists gone wild who produced all sorts of elixirs and tonics. We might remember that when Mary Baker Eddy propounded science and health, uh, she was in part reacting in a spiritual basis against the contamination of drugs and foods and and all sorts of beverages. Um, what we find is that gin was often flavored with creosote instead of juniper berries. And one major ingredient in whiskey was formaldehyde. Uh, we know that Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, in 1907, really exploded that whole world of contamination. We might also know that 14 years before the enactment of the first federal law, acts had been bottled up in Congress trying to do exactly that legislative work to regulate meat, vegetables, beverages, medicines. Um, and it was, of course, when President Theodore Roosevelt sent two emissaries to the Chicago packing house to see whether Upton Sinclair's, bestseller had any validity, and they wired him that things were worse than what Sinclair's The Jungle revealed. And that meant that the Senate had to let that bill become law. But there was a buildup. Let's say you were in, let's say Peoria. Poor Peoria. It always gets picked as the place. It's such a good city. And the local garden club had a speaker, and perhaps the speaker was the state secretary of agriculture. And what he warned the garden club is that food was being contaminated, and that a national law was needed. So there had been all around the country a growing public awareness of the importance of healthful, regulated, food, dependable food and drinks. So I delved into what the historians had been able to divulge. Um, what had been going on all around the country. In 1904, so we're talking about 3 years before Upton Sinclair's novel, 1904. Anybody here from St. Louis? The World's Fair, meet me in St. Louis, Louis. The Ferris wheel that had been at the Chicago World's Fair was re-erected in St. Louis, where the ice cream cone for the first time was offered. There was also an exhibit. The Fair Food Organization took a booth, and the booth they took was right beside the booths by the meat packers. And what they did was show that the juices from the canned hams and the pickling products and the sausages, that all those juices were dyed with chemical dyes. And they dipped they showed in their booth, white silk cloth that was dipped into the juices and turned a flaring red or purple, some ghastly color not found in nature. Thousands of people returned from the St. Louis World's Fair to tell their families and their friends exactly what they had seen. So the public pressure was gaining strength. And so finally, in 1907, the law. Well, meantime, in my novels, Roderick is concerned. Bitters. He's being invited to join a former classmate from law school whose own family produces one of these toxic medicines, which is popular all over the United States. And the law school alum friend would like Roddy to join him in a partnership, and they would produce pure bitters, starting with orange. The problem is, this classmate's wife had recently died in a fall down their stairs in their Oak Park home. And a rogue Chicago detective thinks perhaps this man, Martin Coates, murdered his wife, pushing her down the stairs. Or perhaps his brother, Owen, did it. Or a woman friend who lived with the family saw the opportunity to gain wealth by the death of her good friend. The rogue detective thinks somebody in that house killed her. And the classmate asks Roddy, he's now a widower, a grieving widower, would Roddy and Val please come to Chicago and please persuade this detective that he must cease and desist for all time. He's counting on the DeVeres to do it. And so this is the novel in which Roddy and Val go to Chicago. They have to do the deed. They have to see about it. And so we have several chapters. And this is the Chicago of Jane Addams's Hull House and the packing houses and a lot of rough and tumble in Chicago.
And it was a time of upheaval. You mentioned you had a bit of a reading from that time of upheaval regarding Hull House and all of that. Do you want to?
Well, I'll read the shortest chapter I've ever written. Okay, everybody. So that should cheer you up. Okay, here's what happens. Val and Roddy go to Chicago, and they stay at the auditorium, which is the tallest building in Chicago and was so innovative. It is still, the auditorium is still, maybe some of you have been there. It's a beautiful auditorium, both rustic and elegant at the same time, and
Rustic and
elegant. Right. Okay. Okay. It happens. And so from the top tower of the auditorium, they can see where the Great Fire of 1871 was. They see Chicago built up, but here's what they also encounter. Chicago is filled with jobless men who came to work at the fair, and once it closed, they couldn't find jobs. They're beggars, they're on the march, they're like ghosts, and they're ominous. In addition, in 1885, the Haymarket riot. This was a Haymarket rally in which workmen hoped for a unionization that would give them the 8-hour workday, and instead somebody threw a bomb. 7 policemen were killed, and the union movement was set back all over the United States. The Chicago Haymarket riot was a scandal nationwide. All the newspapers reported it. In addition, the Chicago mayor, Carter Harrison, was no sooner elected than a man who hoped to be appointed to a job knocked on his door, and when the mayor opened the door, the man shot him dead. That happened. Yet again, Mrs. Joseph Bowen, who was working with Jane Addams and the Hull House women to help develop a juvenile court system so that kids would not be thrown into those cells with killers and who knows what. Mrs. Joseph Bowen, one of the ladies who began to speak out in favor of a juvenile court system, was told that a watchman found a strange box on her front porch, her veranda. The police took it away and they exploded it underwater. And if it had exploded on her porch, it could have cost life or lives. So this is what's been going on in Chicago. And Roddy and Val at the auditorium have learned that the hotel has been sort of scrubbed for bombs, because a resident of the hotel has been marked by mobs outside on Michigan Avenue. So Roddy and Val have just had dinner at the Grand Pacific Hotel Ballroom Restaurant, and they've come back and they're leaving for New York the next day. As we would learn, Chicago had not finished with Roderick and Valentine DeVere. The city by the lake, with fair warning and a threat for us. We accounted carefully for the hours from our dinner with Martin to the New York Central train that we would board the following morning. Planning a good night's sleep, we took a hansom cab from the Grand Pacific to the auditorium. The lobby was quiet. The desk clerk nodded as we stepped into the elevator to be whisked to the 8th floor. Arm in arm, we walked softly along the carpet, hearing no voices from the rooms on either side of the corridor. Once inside the suite, we undressed and quietly began gathering up our things, having decided to forego the evening maid and valet service. Working side by side, Roddy and I folded and packed. Tomorrow, we agreed, would be time enough to talk over our dinner. We slept fitfully, as is often the case when travel looms. Neither of us was to recall any sound outside our suite door that night. I heard no one in the corridor, nor did Roddy. At dawn, we washed and dressed quickly, and my husband telephoned for a bellman who was to come promptly with a luggage cart. When he knocked, we expected our luggage to be loaded, but instead the man called us into the corridor where a box lay on the hallway carpet just outside the door. Tied with a red ribbon, the box was topped with one single red rose. The wrapping paper sparkled. "Roddy," I said, "a gift. Someone has." "Madam," the bellman said sharply, "you must not touch it," Roddy said. We three stared at the box. "I will summon the watchman," said the bellman. "Please do not touch the box. We fear it might be." His lips quivered. "Might be." Roddy said aloud what we all thought. "Might be," he said, "a bomb." So, and they're off to New York. All right. And is it a bomb? We'll find out. But Val will say, it was meant for me. One wife became inconvenient. Would another wife be equally inconvenient? If that box were meant for you, Roddy, instead of a rose, it would have a cigar. So,
in addition to this mystery series, and I'm so looking forward to the fifth one, you've also written a number of anthologies about cocktails, Gilded Age cocktails, booze books, Gilded Age cocktail, a Jazz Age cocktail,
and the newest one, Mid-Century Cocktails, kids. It's coming out for this holiday season. The publisher would love for you to know about this. So mid-century. So as I was telling this, the publisher wanted to call the book, this new one, and let me assure you, it's the social history of cocktails. It's who drank them and under what circumstances, parties, intimate arrangements, whatever, Playboy clubs. The publisher wanted to call this third one Atomic Cocktails. I said, it sounds cartoonish and vaguely frightening. How about mid-century? Everybody's using the word mid-century now. And we tussled over it until Vladimir Putin started to talk about nuclear weapons. And then the publisher said, "Okay, Cecelia, you win. Mid-century cocktails." But there's a little atom buzzing around on the cover. And the way these cocktail books came about is that I'll be frank, after many years of scholarship and writing about those who struggled at the lower end of the Gilded Age social order, such as Jack London. A poor boy, he in a way rivals Mark Twain. I don't mean rivals, he's parallels Mark Twain in the sense that both of them made a lot of money, spent a lot of money, and had to work like demons to keep the income flowing. But London was born poor, worked for 10 cents an hour at a jute mill, and finally, because his mother was sort of a gambler and threw the dice, and said, go to my attic of my boarding house I managed and see if you can make any money writing. After many years of classroom teaching and researching on the lower end of the social order, I did a book called What Would Mrs. Astor Do? About the manners and mores of the Gilded Age. And it was my literary agent, Deirdre Mullane, who suggested it. And here's how it came about. Can I tell?
Please.
All right.
I don't know the
We're
story.
we're among friends, all right. Deirdre called me up and said, Cecelia, Julian Fellows has a contract for a TV series on the Gilded Age. And he's been under contract with NBC for years. I think this thing's gonna pop. And here's the book I have in mind, and you're the client of mine who could do it. You're the one who's been immersed in the Gilded Age for so many years. Float up to the top of the social order and think about Mrs. Astor and the Jewels. How did they comport themselves? What did they wear? What did they eat? What did their mansions look like? How did they get around? What steamships? Where did they go? Who did they go with? You can do it. And so I did. And Julian Fellows moved over to HBO Max. And the first series, maybe some here, have enjoyed, and I have enjoyed, and the second series will pop next spring. And Mrs. Astor is still selling well, but after Mrs. Astor, my literary agent, Deirdre Mullane, Deirdre and I were having a cocktail in Tarrytown, New York. How about a book on cocktails? We didn't do much with cocktails in the Mrs. Astor book, did we? We did champagne, we did. But what about cocktails? Cecelia, I see a book. And so Gilded Age Cocktails was, and here's the pleasure for me. It's not, I will say I enjoy one cocktail. I can't drink more. And maybe half a glass of wine at dinner. That's about as much as I can do. But the social history of who invented them, who drank them where and when, the Pisco Sour. What was that Pisco Sour? Oh, the Pisco Sour was from a grape from Peru that came into San Francisco during the gold rush when South Americans came up to California to see if they could find gold, and they brought with them and had shipped these containers that tapered to a point at the bottom and had Pisco brandy in them. And then in San Francisco, not in the sailors' Barbary Coast saloons, but on Montgomery Street, where the gentlemen and the captains of the ships imbibed and enjoyed themselves, the Pisco Sour. Ta-da! And how about the Ramos Gin Fizz? Had those? They're really good. Where'd they come from? Henry Ramos in New Orleans found that egg whites and other ingredients, and for a while they were so popular, these Ramos Gin Fizzes, that Henry Ramos had 12 bartenders, men with heavily muscled arms, who could shake those shakers so the egg whites would froth. That's how popular. And then, of course, the Sazerac cocktail, also out of New Orleans. What was special? The Péchot bitters. Bitters from Antoine Péchot's family that had left what is now Haiti when the revolution overturned the elite families and they fled to New Orleans, and Antoine Péchot began a pharmacy in which one of the medicines dispensed was bitters, his bitters. And so came the Sazerac cocktail, only with Péchot's bitters. So I learned a lot and enjoyed writing about it. It was just fun, but it was also hard.
I can imagine. When I first started reading a Gilded Death, I made the recipes, the cocktail recipes, which are throughout the book. So I've sort of had every one of the drinks.
One thing you had to have noticed, Grace, you had to have noticed they're a bit sweeter than today's palate
Yes.
appreciates. And I was asked to put in at least one sentence about that. It's not a sentence that says beware the recipes, but do take notice that the names, the martini, for example, is apt to have Italian vermouth in it, and it's worth noting that for the first time in the Gilded Age, sugar was plentiful for a lot of people. An antique store might exhibit a sugar safe, a lockbox for the loaf of sugar, which was in relatively rare supply. Lock up the sugar, lest servants get at it, or the children. And for the Gilded Age period, we're roughly talking. Here's Mark Twain's novel, 1873. On up, sugar from the Caribbean and from Hawaii. The children and grandchildren of the missionaries became sugar barons, and the U.S. was able, under very favorable trade terms, eliminating all tariffs, to have our country, mainland, flooded with Hawaiian sugar. So sugar in cocktails, a sweet drink, was just a delight. But these days we like it drier.
Well, I was going to say, out of all of them, they're all relatively sweet. The Manhattan is my favorite, though.
Okay. I'll see that and raise you an old fashioned.
When does the new book, Mid-Century Cocktails, get released?
I have received my author's shipment, and they're saying October the books are shipped to the stores, and they're hoping for a good holiday season.
Well, everyone here in this audience is going to buy a copy of that, right?
Yes, yeah. Let's see it. Raising hands here.
And tonight we do have a Deadly Gilded Freefall on sale in the gift shop. If you haven't already gotten a copy, please pick it up. We have a little bit of time for questions. My colleague Omar, if anybody has any questions, he'll bring a mic to you. You can take my mic. Or you got one?
Or mean cracks.
Okay.
You know, we're up for.
So if you have any questions.
There is
So are these on Audible?
No, you have to.
Old-fashioned reading.
Yeah, I'm sorry to tell you this. I've been asked that too.
Not hear me?
Well, we're streaming
online.
live, so.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yes.
Are these on Audible?
I'm sorry to say, no Audible as yet. I will tell you, some years back, in the early aughts, I was also writing some mystery novels, and there was an audiobook, and it went to someone who at that time was winning prizes for her readings. I was so horrified when I heard her, because her voice was nothing like my characters, and it's a sad story. I never met this person, and we all have Florida in mind. Her home studio was flooded, and she went down to that basement studio to retrieve her equipment and didn't make it out.
Oh.
So this is something, for all of us, on the planes, when we're on an airplane, as I was today, if anything goes amiss, don't reach for your luggage, don't grab your purse, just get out. Get out. Yeah. You didn't need to hear that, but there it was. All right.
Ever listen to another Audible? No, just kidding.
We have
We
a
like
question from someone online. Kathleen asks, do you develop your characters first, or do you research an era or place and figure out who might exist there?
I have spent so much time in the Gilded Age over decades that the characters arise from actual figures I have encountered and read a lot about. For example, Valentine's late father, Patrick Mackle from County Donegal, is modeled on John Mackey, as I was telling people here on the Mark Twain House Museum. At the same time, he's not a full character. I need to know about him so that his daughter, his fictional daughter, Val, can refer to him in an authentic way. She can remember sentences he spoke to her, advice, warnings, comments. John Mackey's history is my foundation for her late father. And in order for that father, who's never appears, to be real in her life, I needed to know a lot about him.
Any other questions?
Hi. I was just wondering if these books are meant to be read in consecutive order, or are they freestanding stories?
Thank you for that question, because that's another issue that anybody who's writing a series is about. You have to decide whether you're going to march your reader from books 1, 2, 3, or whether any book can be picked up and read in and of itself. That's what I do and try to do. Obviously, some material has to be there to familiarize a newcomer with who these people are, hopefully in a different way each time and without belaboring. But any one of these books could be picked up and read right there. So they work as standalones, just as they will work as a series. But in each of the books, as I was saying, you need to offer something new and different. The DeVeres do some traveling. They not only go to Chicago, they go to Palm Beach. They visit parts of Manhattan that are not the Upper East Side, and in the newest one, which is underway, they are in the Hudson Valley in a country estate in the few weeks between seasons. It was called the Between Season, and something has happened there in the Hudson Valley. So any book can be read separate. They don't have to be read in sequence.
I envy their railroad car.
Yes, they have a private car, so of course they could go to Palm Beach.
Yeah.
Because and the Trestle Bridge at the time, the Royal Poinciana, which Henry Flagler built, about 1,100 rooms for the wealthy. Their car, their refurbished car, actually, of course, it was Roddy's family car, at the verge of a forced sale when he married Val, so they've had it refurbished. The Louisa, as they back into Palm Beach, right by the Royal Poinciana Hotel, or as the guests call it, the Ponce, their car joins some 50 other private rail cars. Sort of yachts on wheels.
Any other questions? Any more online?
There is one person did ask, could you list the books in order?
Okay, in order. Ready? First, A Gilded Death. They all have gilded in the title, okay? A Gilded Death. Then, Murder, Murder, Murder in Gilded Central Park. Followed by A Fatal Gilded High Note. In this one, there is a death in an opera box at the Diamond Horseshoe at the Met in January 2nd, 1899. And then the one just out this month, A Deadly Gilded Free Fall. To come will be A Gilded Drowning Pool. Stay tuned.
I just have a comment that your cocktail book coming out, the mid-century whatever. I forgot the second half of that.
Mid-century cocktails.
I mean, the mid-century was mostly known, maybe that phrase is known for the furniture, but maybe more popularly it's because of the Cold War and atomic nuclear destruction.
That's absolutely true. And of course, in my introduction, I needed to confront both McCarthyism and the space race, and Atoms for Peace. It was President Eisenhower's speech to the United Nations, in which he acknowledged the nuclear termination horror very briefly, and assured the nation that our defense would stay strong and continuous. At the same time, hoped that atomic energy would be used for peaceful purposes all over the country. And very soon, there were hardball candies called atomic jawbreakers, and in Salt Lake City you could buy an atomic hamburger for 45 cents. The jawbreakers, yeah. I know.
Atomic fireballs.
Atomic fireballs, that's it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what it, yes. Whoa.
Well,
Are we out of time here? How are we doing?
That was an atomic fireball.
Sizzle, sizzle.
I think we've actually come to the end. I don't want it to end, but I think we have finished up. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Cecelia, for coming and speaking about this. It has been great to meet you. I am pretty sure that Mark Twain would have loved you.
That is a high compliment, Grace, from you, who conduct tours, and you know the ins and outs of this house in a way that few people ever could.
And thank you all for joining us online and in the audience live. For those of you that are here live tonight, we'll be having a book signing outside of the store. Please bring your books. And again, thank you for joining us.